everyone. Thank you for coming to the Indonesia Forum Kajian Pembangunan (FKP), which this morning is co-hosted with the Indonesia Regional Science Association or IRSA and Badan Kebijakan Fiskal (BKF) of Ministry of Finance. Before we start, I would just like to remind everyone that attendees are muted. Everyone are muted. This is due to our security feature of the Zoom. However, during the Q&A later, you can participate by giving comments or asking questions by raising your hand or writing in the Q&A box. We will give you the link to the slides after the event once we receive the slides from the speakers, but it will be always available in our cloud drive, which I will put a link in the chat box. Thank you also for coming, everyone watching on YouTube, participating on YouTube. We are also live on YouTube. You can also participate in the discussion by writing your comments or questions in the comment box on YouTube. We will transfer it to the Zoom and then ask it to the presenters. Hopefully we have time for that. The FKP Secretariat is supported by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and also by the Australian National University. So this morning, we will start with remarks by representative of Badan Kebijakan Fiskal (BKF), Bapak Mahfud Sujai, who will provide remarks now. Pak Sujai, the place and Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Lydia. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, it is my pleasure to address today's Development Study Forum session on the topic of COVID-19 disruption in Indonesia. This session will feature 3 papers that have comprehensively examined the impacts of economic disruptions due to the COVID pandemic and the challenges to recover from the disruptions. During the 17th IRSA conference last month, the papers have successfully gained the 2022 IRSA-BKF Paper Awards. First of all, I would like to send my apologies that our head of Center for Macroeconomic Policies in the Center for Policy Office, he cannot attend this meeting because he has to accompany the head of the Fiscal Policy Agency to other meeting with the Minister of Finance. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the socio-economic impact of the pandemic is very enormous. The world has tried to tackle around numerous economic disruptions during the pandemic. The disruption started with rapid and frequent movement restrictions, supply disruption, diminishing productivity, and emerging risk of scarring effects in the labor market. Besides the significant economic disruptions, there is a transition from pandemic to endemic phase. The transition also poses a great challenge due to rising uncertainty, especially for the government amid limited fiscal space and policy options. Despite those challenges, we still have opportunity to shape the appropriate policy to deal with future dynamics. Indeed, the policy should be constructed based on solid research or evidence-based approach. In this regard, innovations and new ideas for government policy are essential. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we received in this IRSA conference in Lombok many days ago, we received more than 50 articles that had been carefully and thoroughly scrutinized by a committee. The reviewing process was conducted in a double-blind review process, so I can guarantee you that the reviewers didn't have any idea about whose article they reviewed. Also, one paper was reviewed by 2 reviewers to avoid reviewer bias. In the end, each reviewer gave a score on each article, and then the three highest scored papers were chosen as the awardees of the IRSA-BKF Paper Award. I'm glad that we have a dedicated group of reviewers at BKF. I also need to address that in the midst of the tight schedule, the reviewers were finally able to review all the articles. Among others, the reviewers looked for a solid research question, along with a robust methodology and insightful results and discussion in the paper. I may say that the reviewing process was not easy since we have many well-written articles. The IRSA-BKF Paper Awards is a concrete example of a great collaboration between government and academia to provide evidence-based policy. In the future, I do hope that the cooperation between BKF and IRSA will continue. The collaboration will bring greater benefits not only for knowledge development, but also as a base for policy formulation. I wish that next year's IRSA's conference will attract more submissions, particularly on the topic of government policy evaluation. The evaluation is necessary to revisit and implement a better policy. Therefore, the impacts of the policy should be examined carefully and objectively by academia, while the government will continuously improve the decision-making process. Before I finish my remark, allow me to congratulate the awardees for their excellent papers. I hope all the awardees can continually share their sharp views for us. Finally, I hope that today's discussion will be very fruitful and meaningful for all of us. Thank you very much for the time and Zoom room for us to give remarks. I hope this conference will run successfully. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Mahmud. Great to hear about the process, and thank you to BKF for the dedication of volunteers, I guess, to review all the papers and also explain to us the process.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have we have like 20 analysts to review the paper, and each analyst reviewed around 4 or 5 papers. So it's like a very hard decision for us because the papers are great, very great, all of them. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to invite Professor Budi Roso Sudarmo on behalf of IRSA to give brief remarks. Pak Budi, about 5 minutes. Thank you. Silakan. Pak Budi, you're still muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Bu Lydia. First of all, on behalf of the Indonesian Regional Science Association, I would like to thank Forum Kajian Pembangunan and Badan Kebijakan Fiskal for their willingness to collaborate with IRSA. I also would like to congratulate the winner of IRSA-BKF Paper Award. IRSA itself is an intermultidisciplinary association aiming to strengthen research related to development of Indonesia. And one of its main activities is IRSA Conference, which serve as a media in which academics can meet other academics to discuss their work, to get input to their works and to strengthening their work, but as well as to provide a media between academic and policymakers to discuss topics that is important for development in Indonesia. Now, one strategy to link between policymaker and researcher so that policymaker can express what topic they need and academic could respond on what they have or what research they have been conducted is to conduct this IRSA-BKF Award. So the process of IRSA-BKF Award is as follows. at the end of each year, IRSA and BKF meet and discuss what topic that BKF would like to receive, or BKF would like to see, or BKF would need some input on that topic. And so each year, the topic of IRSA-BKF Award has been different depending on what BKF think the topic that they actually would like to get input in. And we announced it, and so then academics in Indonesia who happen to work on that topic could actually submit and present their paper and being evaluated. And if they are one among the good, they could win this award as an incentive for their good work. And this strategy seemed to be very effective. So far, we have been able to aim or attract academics who work on the topic that BKF need input in. And so we are right now are in discussion to also develop IRSA-BKF Award. So hopefully next year we will have IRSA-BKF Award. And so it could be a way to actually help BKF to receive input from academics around Indonesia. So that is about IRSA and IRSA-BKF Awards. And again, thank you for FKP and BKF for our collaboration. And I also hope that audience will enjoy this paper presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Budi. Great to hear that the program will be expanded to Bappenas next year. So researchers, get ready for another set of awards next year. So we'll come to the essence of our meeting this morning, which will be led by Dr. Umbu Rekuraya, or Pak Raya. He is an academic at Universitas Nusa Cendana and also this year's coordinator of the Forum Kajian Pembangunan Organizing Committee. So, Pak Raya, your time is and the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Bu Lydia. Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to have 3 paper presentations from the winners, and the sequence will be one of the presenter will present the paper for 20 minutes, and then it's followed directly with Q&A for 15 minutes. So please just consider the time the time restriction, and then will be followed with the second presentation and then the third presentation. So our first presentation is from Nudgeplus with collaboration with friends from ERIA and Universitas Hasanuddin, and it will be presented by Pak Dimas Prasetyo from Nudgeplus. Pak Dimas, the venue is yours. Please introduce yourself and your team, and then just go directly with the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Umbu. Wait a minute. Please allow me to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Okay, here you go. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that this is the slide, not the control panel slide, right? Because I frequently missed with that window. Okay, great to know that. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our study and our findings, particularly on how to increase hand washing behavior during the pandemic. Thank you for BKF. Thank you for Forum Kajian Pembangunan. Thank you for IRSA. This is basically the following presentation presented by one of our authors, which is Mas Pyan, which at the moment he cannot join the presentation because he has another agenda. But here we have also Mas Lury and Mbak Dwi. I want to welcome both of my co-authors. Present. Help me out if I cannot answer your intelligent question. Right. Here we want to present our study, which was conducted in 2020 to 2021, which is one of the answer, one of the innovation and we did in tackling in corresponding about the hand washing, low hand washing incidence occurrence during the pandemic in terms of health protocol adherence. Here we worked with British Embassy and also with the East Java government to study the population, to study the local nuance, and to study the problematic behavior, which is low incidence of hand washing behavior. And we ended up with developing the intervention, the nudging intervention, and see how it goes, how it affects the incidence of hand washing incidents. So about the others, we have 4 authors, including me. We are Nudgeplus consultant, and I personally work also in laboratory of crisis and social intervention in psychology, University of Indonesia. Mas Lury is working in Indonesian Ministry of Finance, Kementerian Keuangan. Mas Pyan is working in ERIA, as well as working in Nudgeplus consultant, and Mbak Dwi, also our Nudgeplus associate, and working as an adjunct lecturer in University of Hasanuddin. Just want to let you know that this paper is also under review in Journal of Analysis of Social Issues and Public Policy. So here's the outline. We will deliver the introduction and aim and significance of our study. We also will explain about our 2 study, which included in our papers, and as well as the discussion, the limitation, the conclusion, and so on, and followed by the question and answer. Right. So here's the introduction. So as you know, during the pandemic, we faced with the challenges of the compliance, particularly in health protocol campaign, right? And hand washing behavior is one of the the health protocol related problem that the peoples in general have not been complied with. It is according with the BPS data. While we also know that there are lots of intervention with traditional framework in which giving the education, giving appeal, giving information to the people, to the society, whether this is good and this is bad. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do this, etc., etc. And we also see at the moment that nudging intervention is also rising, particularly here in Indonesia. There in the West, there are lots of intervention that already involving the nudge framework, and we also see that the kind of framework is also starting to get popular in Indonesia. As you might already know, there are lots of institution organizations that try to involve the behavioral economics and behavioral science into their policy, into their strategy to influence people, right? But the importance here is why we want to inject a behavioral economics intervention, which also known as nudge, because the providing information when we want to influence people and we use the traditional health related intervention, it is not sufficient to just use the providing information, giving education, because in psychology, the intention, the providing information know about the fact about the problem is not equal to changing the behavior, because that intention is not necessarily translated into the actual behavior. So there's a gap basically between the knowledge and the actual behavior. There's a variable here about called intention that is not become sole predictor of an actual behavior. So so that's one of the significance of the why we use that nudge. Also, there are lots of nudges in hygiene behavior related these last 5 years. We can see that there are lots of papers, for example, Karis et al., Blackwell and Goya Tocheto, Wages and the Conning, and Grover et al. These all intervention basically talk about hand washing behavior, right? And how to use and how to increase that hand washing behavior by using a kind of like arrow, for example, in Wages and the Conning, by using images, by use like what Blackwell and Goya Tocheto and Karis et al. Did. But also, interestingly, Grover et al. Also use two kind of intervention: nudge-based intervention and the traditional framework intervention, that is giving education. And that's the study resulted the kind of not significant difference between the two kind of intervention. Though, so we see that in some cases, in some contexts, those kind of intervention, nudge intervention, can also works best with the traditional related education, or in other words, traditional framework intervention can also work in the same way as nudge intervention did. Okay, so this is how we want to prove further in our study. We have two studies basically. The first study wants to identify the best nudging stimulus that increasing the hand washing intention. And in study 2, we want to identify further whether this kind of hand washing visuals can yield actual behavior. And also we also include another intervention that we are going to talk later. Okay, the first one is the study 1. The study 1 is basically the online survey, right? So we do pre-post experiment, and we use within subject. We use online platform, and the one that we measure is the intention. And the kind of treatment is our poster. So basically, we expose the participant with poster, and then ask them to answer whether are you going to hand wash before exposing the poster, and after exposing the poster, they also they are given similar question. So they basically answering the same question, pre and post. So the intervention that we use is we developed 3. The one that here T1, we name it T1 steps visual, T2 hand wash visual, T3 doctor visual. So these treatments we developed except of T1, because T1 is the one that already developed by our health ministry, but we crop the logo to eliminate the power bias, right? So, and the T2 and the T3 is the intervention that we developed. So in T2, we use the variable saliency with contrast color. We also use the visual priming. As you can see, there are pictures of bubbles being rubbed in your hands, which we hope that yield a condition of fun of doing hand washing, right? And at the moment, we also use the rhyming words. In Bahasa, it said COVID-19 bisa jadi di tangan Anda, cuci tangan plus sabun membunuh mereka. So this kind of rhyming, we hope that it can deliver a better message, rhyming, well-resonant message. In T3, we use the doctor visual. We also use saliency, the percentage, where the cuci tangan and plus sabun, hand washing plus soap can reduce the risk of 35% of being infected by COVID-19. And also we use messenger. Here you can see that the picture of doctor. Okay, the result is, as you can see here, we have a different numbers of observation across the groups, and there are means of and standard deviation data over here, and we use the ANOVA. Okay, ANOVA analysis. By measuring the difference of intention post minus pre. So we have the mean. We have the difference mean of change here, as you can see here in the third column. And ANOVA analysis resulted that this steps visual, hand wash visual, and doctor visual yield a significant difference amongst the others. Okay. Right. So here we see that the T1, T2, and T3 has opportunity to increase the intention to hand wash. But which one that we are going to use? So we also we analyze a subsequent analysis, which is the recall accuracy. Similarly, we recall the accuracy and we converted it into 5 Likert type coding. In which one represent lowest accuracy, 5 represent highest accuracy, and similarly we also do the ANOVA, and turns out we have the visual that have highest recall accuracy and is significant compared to other poster is the T2. T2 is the one that has this picture. Okay, the hand wash visual. So that we take that further into study 2, in which we similarly have the pre-post experiment. We have 4 groups. We have control groups and we have the intervention group. We conducted between subject in one of the location in public space in Sidoarjo, East Java area. This is a field observation. So we place surveillance camera to record the behavior and whether they do the hand wash, whether they use the soap or not. And here we measure the real behavior of hand washing. And the treatment, I'll take you into that in the second and the next slides. We have 3 intervention basically. The treatment control, we don't do anything. We just record the baseline, right? In treatment 1, we create the permanent facility. Okay. In treatment 2, that permanent facility is adding the nudging poster, the hand wash visual. In treatment 3, we're adding in the footprints. So this is a kind of accumulation of the intervention, and we're going to analyze that with the likelihood ratio chi-square. So this is to give you a glance of our visuals of our intervention. This is the control treatment. We don't do anything. This is just a kind of temporary bucket, modified bucket with the soap beside that temporary hand washing station. It's not seen. It's not easily seen. Basically, it's beyond. It's beside one of the pillar in that area, and it's hardly to find. Whether though if it is though that people can find that hand washing station, it's not that salient enough to yield the behavior. So in P1, we provide the physical infrastructure. We near the entrance, we we apply a more physical infrastructure in the hope that people will, okay, this is the proper one, so I will use that facility because this is the proper one. This is how we usually do the hand washing properly. Okay, in P2 we adding a poster above in eye level angle above the kitchen, the wash sink. And finally, in P3, we adding the footprints leading to that hand washing station. Okay, so our result using the likelihood likelihood ratio of chi-square, we see that across the intervention. So before we're going to analyze using the inferential statistic, you can see that the number, the percentage is increasing from the P0 to P3. Okay, 17%, 18%. In P2, when the hand wash visual is tested, increased to 24%. Finally, in footprints, rocket up goes to 30%. When we did analyze the using the likelihood ratio chi-square, we found that when in week 3, which is the P2 intervention is tested, the changes of hand washing incidence rate differ significantly, as well as in the week of in 4th week, in which we finally tested adding in the footprints compared to other 3. Similarly to the some sub-usage behavior, also similarly we yield a relatively increasing trend of sub-usage, in which P0 30%, P1 30%, P2 18%, and P3 18%. But as you can see, the significance of changing only occurred in P2. When we're adding the footprints, the kind of sub-usage behavior is not significantly increased, but at least maintain the same number, the same percentage. But interestingly, we do divide the kind of respondents between employees, because this is a public place. The office, one of the office of in public domain, it's a Diskom Info, kantor Diskom Info in Sidoarjo. Among employees, there's no sign of significance. In visitors' point of view, the significance of ICE here. Also in P3, when tested with footprints. So we have 3 last slides. We found that the study 1, the hand wash visual, is the best in delivering the internet message. We also find that the hand wash visual poster is significantly raised the hand wash behavior. Our study aligned with previous study that we already explained in the beginning. We have limitation, of course. We measure the long-term effect. There's a possibility that the effect of treatment decrease over time. We've also done in-depth analyze the between subject variability issues, and probably using other kind of measurement instead of aside of surveillance camera can better understand the kind of occurrence that people behave. So our study conclude that we do that in terms of developing the intervention, we pay attention on being sensitive in acknowledging local nuance, and we design intervention to mitigate that local nuance to mitigate the impact from those factors, because we need to understand the local nuance, local context to impactful intervention. And also our study proved that procurement of infrastructure, and as you can see in P1 intervention, just providing the hand washing station is not enough. Our study proved that our cost-efficient nudge intervention, pasting the visuals and footprints can significantly increasing the hand washing rate. And our study proved that it almost doubled the incidence rate, whether though it's still below 50%, of course, but it's almost double the hand washing incidence rate within our measurement period. I'm not sure we can share you the video, whether we can still have time for that, Pak Umbu, or if not, that we can continue.
You can have 2 minutes with the videos to give an idea.
Okay, sure. Wait a minute. Sorry for that. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen, the video.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so maybe stop share.
Yeah.
And start to share screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that screen at the moment. Okay, so I can play that. So it's only less than 3 minutes, so it should be give you.
That's okay.
Yeah. Dengan bantuan British Embassy Jakarta dan dukungan dari pemerintah Provinsi Jawa Timur, Nudgeplus mendesain sebuah intervensi perubahan perilaku dengan menggunakan behavioral science di salah satu kantor instansi publik di Jawa Timur. Tujuan dari intervensi ini adalah meningkatkan compliance rate untuk perilaku cuci tangan dan cuci tangan. So this visual will show you the incidence rate of each week, starting from the baseline week. As you can see, a very less salient of hand washing station. So this is the second week of intervention. We provide the permanent infrastructure, and people start to the incidents start to rise. So this is the following week, the third weeks, pasting the hand wash visual. More and more people come to the wastafel and hand wash. And lastly, in the fourth weeks, we applied the footprints leading to that sink. So this is how our surveillance camera record the behavior. It's hidden. No one consider they are being recorded. But for sure, we don't get that individual data. All right, thank you. I think that's end up my presentation. Thank you, Pak Umbu, and I give it back to you.
Thank you, Pak Dimas. It's very interesting technique, I believe. So now I invite the floor to ask question. You can raise your hand or you can type your question. Do you have question in YouTube? Not yet. Anyone want to ask question to Pak Dimas and team?
I think Bu Lydia.
Yeah, please, Bu Lydia.
Saya ada pertanyaan. Thank you for the presentation. That's very interesting. I've never seen research done this way before with camera and monitoring each activity, done. So I have a couple of questions. One is about, I don't know if you presented, but what is the type of person, for example, the profile? Did you collect the profile of people who came? And I'm just interested because to compare that with the general population, how this could be generalized to the general population. Secondly, what do you think is this like a doubling of the preferred action, or what we want people to do? Is it good? And compared to what others found, can it be like tripled or quadrupled, or how much does nudging could actually, like, if you find the best nudge possible, how much of a change in behavior can we actually get? Thank you.
Okay, so Ibu Lydia has 2 questions. And the first one is on the profile of the participants. I guess we can call them participants, and then the power of the intervention compared to the literature. Please, Pak Dimas and team.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Lydia, for very tough questions, actually. Right. So the first one, the type of respondent, as you might, as I have already give you guys a concern about, because we record the using the surveillance camera, and we maintain that we don't and when we don't do that, we have the permission. We have the permission from the local authorities to record that behavior, but not individually. Right? So we don't collect the individual differences in detail. We only differentiate whether this is the employee or this is the visitors from the looks that recorded, that captured from the surveillance camera, right? Yes, you might already know the employees, those using the uniforms, right? And the visitors is not using the uniforms. And for the use of generalizability and how it impacted in the general population, as we acknowledge that we only do this in one public space, right? And as you might already know, using different the lots of public spaces, there will be require lots of paperwork. That's become our limitation, and we acknowledge that. And but to answer that question about the generalizability, we separate the analysis between the employees and the visitors. We assume that the visitors, not the same visitors, come to the public space, that the public office every day across the 4 weeks, right? And our analysis, our likelihood chi-square analysis, found that when we specifically analyze analysis for visitors respondents, the impact of the nudge persisted, even in using behavior, in using the soap. In P3, when we pass the footprints, there are no significant difference amongst the employees, but the effect was there for the visitors. So we conclude that here, with some limitation, of course, that the applied this kind of intervention can be applied in public space in general, because in public space we face with different kind of people, right? And not using not that individuals only, not repeating individuals. So basically, I hope that answered the question number one. The question number two, whether this is doubling the power of nudge, right? So this is an interesting question, and I think when we do the power of nudge, we need to also include the nudge intervention that already discussed and studied in lots of literatures at the moment, right? In the Western and the Eastern area, as you can see, that nudge is very sensitive to local context. Every nudge intervention in the West cannot be easily adapted in Indonesia because we need to identify the local context there, right? And as social science already know that the effect when we do the coherence, for example, coherence coefficients, the kind of value it's very less. It's very least likely to exceed 0.5, right? Okay, 0.5. It's very least likely to above the 0.5, unless that is the very impactful nudge intervention and in a very secluded context. Right? But there's a lot of literature discussing about how that nudge can last in a longer period. But here, our study acknowledged that limitation, and we acknowledge also that limitation. But the one that we want to highlight here is basically using the cost efficiency. You can start cost efficiency intervention. You can start to significantly change the behavior. Of course, it is have to be followed by subsequent intervention, coercive, or using the law, or maybe using a more educative intervention to strengthen that nudge, because that nudge, that system one thinking, will likely be transformed to system two thinking, right? During the people will try to interpret. People will try to move that perception from the system one to system two, and we have to strengthen that shifting using other kind of intervention. I hope that answers your question, Bu Lydia. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pak Dimas. The next question is from Pak Mahfud and then Pak Daniel Halim. Please, Pak Mahfud, if you can ask your question directly. Okay, maybe Pak Daniel first. Oh, Pak Mahfud, please.
Okay, thank you, Pak Umbu. I think this paper is very interesting, and it has original ideas. That's why it's become a winner of the awards. And I think it will have a great impact to the procurement and budget allocation, especially for developing or building hand washing station in the public area. So my question is, in your opinion, how this paper will have an impact to the budget efficiency, yeah? And how is the implementation of your paper to the public policy, for example, in the government, local government? Because sometimes in the local government, it looks like a quite big budget allocation to build the hand washing station, yeah, in every place. Yeah, maybe that's one my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Mahfud. And we'll take Pak Daniel's question before Pak Dimas can respond. Please, Pak Daniel.
Thank you, Pak Umbu, and thank you, Dimas, for the excellent presentation. It was really interesting. And I also would echo what Pak Umbu, Bu Lydia, and Pak Mahfud also mentioned, that it was a really ingenious idea of capturing observations with the camera. So I have two questions. The first question is related to the methodology and the difficulty in making comparisons, because like from what I understand, you're doing the treatment in stages. So the comparison is at different weeks. So one question on that is, whether you observe different total number of visitors in different weeks and or different types of visitors in different weeks, and whether that would affect the observations used or the interpretations of the results. For example, if let's say in week 1, there were fewer people coming in because there was a higher, a lot of people work from home. And so it's, whereas in week 2, there were more people working in the office. And so different compositions of employees versus visitors, and that might affect the compliance rate. Where suppose like employees are more likely to comply, whereas visitors are less likely to comply, and whether that affects the results. So that's the first question. The second question is on the measurement of outcomes itself. So it's really interesting that you're looking at the fraction of people who eventually do hand washing. So another outcome of interest potentially is whether people do hand wash in the recommended intensity. So they do wash, let's say 30 seconds or so, and whether you have that observation or whether you can quantify that observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. Pak Dimas, please. You have like 2 minutes to give a brief response. Silakan.
Okay, thank you for the questions, Pak Daniel and Pak Mahfud. Okay, for question Pak Mahfud, I would say that this paper try to provide the kind of way of thinking in terms of developing the intervention, particularly for influencing people behavior during the pandemics, because one of the nudge intervention framework is we acknowledge how people process the information, right? And that's why we have to understand the local context, and that's why we have to develop our intervention based on that local knowledge. I think that's the implication that the public policy can take from our study. So don't rush to implement, to develop and implement your public policy. Test that first, and please acknowledge the local context. And it could be different across the area. For example, you can say that the local context in East Java can be different in other area of Indonesia. You can say that way. And also, this is important because the nudge intervention is basically developed from one of the feature is developing low-cost budget intervention. And I think that's the kind of implementation that public policy can take from our study. I think that's hopefully that answer your question, Pak Mahfud. And moving on to Pak Daniel, the methodology, right? It's very, we acknowledge that we have 4 weeks intervention using the same place in this Kantor Diskom Info. As I already mentioned previously, we separate visitors and the employees, and we see across the weeks can be different across the week. It's similar. So it's the percentage of number of employees coming to the office and the visitors is similar. It's across almost 50%, 50-50. Okay, it's almost 50-50. And we analyze the inferential statistic using that percentage. And each of the week, the number of observed sample is above 200. So I think it should hopefully it could exceed the minimum sample of we need to do this research. I hope that answer your number 1 question. Whether I know the kind of the question needs a lot of further discussion on that, and we have to have another discussion to elaborate more how to create a good methodology to get a very, very proper interpretation on that. So the point number two, the question number two is about the quality of hand wash. Yes, this is very, very interesting question. And we do in our paper differentiate between hand washing and hand washing with soap. Whether as you might already know, in WHO, the kind of hand washing is interpreted as those involving soap usage. But that's not always the case, particularly in low-income society like us in Indonesia. Hand wash and hand wash with soap is kind of a layering behavior, particularly when you want to influence people. It's kind of a layer, right? Particularly in low-income society, and that's why we separate that hand washing and hand washing with soap. But we don't identify further for the duration of the hand washing. This is kind of the limitation. Probably we can or another researcher can address in the future study. I hope that also answer your question, Pak Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dimas. The next presentation is from our colleague at the World Bank, Pak Daniel Halim. The floor is yours. You're still muted? Yeah, okay. You're still muted, Pak Daniel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pak Umbu. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm an economist with the World Bank. First of all, on behalf of the team, I want to thank the organizers, BKF and IRSA, for putting together this excellent webinar and in promoting cross-learning on research about Indonesia. We are honored and pleased to be invited to present this work, looking at the initial impacts of COVID on employment in Indonesia and how women and men are affected differently. So this is joint work with Hambali and Ririn Purnamasari, both are at the World Bank. So here's an outline for today, and jumping straight to the study. As many of us know, the COVID-19 crisis is unlike a typical crisis. The COVID-19 not only disrupted the economy, but in so many ways changed how we do things and how we live. It is a global crisis impacting all countries with lockdown measures, health crisis, food crisis, global supply chain disruption, to name a few. And to this day, we're still recuperating from the aftershock impacts. And the onset of the pandemic itself brought an unprecedented economic impacts to Indonesia, with Indonesia's GDP contracted by more 5.3% in Q2 in 2020 and 3.5% in Q3 of 2020. And unemployment rate reached its highest annual increase since 1996 with 7.1% increase, whereas the share of formal jobs declined by 6 percentage points. But aside from the scale and the scope of the disruptions, unlike a typical crisis where men's employment tend to be more adversely impacted than women's, because of men's concentration in the manufacturing sector and also their higher baseline employment rates relative to women, the COVID-19 crisis was also anticipated to have a different type of impact, with a greater impact on and researchers calling it a she session as opposed to a men session. With occupational segregation, women are more likely to be concentrated in high contact service sectors such as tourism and hospitality, which are particularly hit by the crisis. Meanwhile, the exacerbated care responsibilities such as childcare, elder care, caring for the ill, and household chores further prohibit women's ability to engage in paid employment. And given disruptions in the care service sector, with school and daycare closures, increased healthcare needs, and others, so the theoretical prediction suggests that the COVID-19 crisis could potentially depress women's employment further than men's in this particular crisis. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is potentially women who are more likely in the reserve labor force. So because a lot more women are not part of the labor force yet. So when a crisis hits, they could potentially come in and provide support for the households and temporarily increase their labor supply to help households cope with income losses. And now there was that famous example of the East Asian financial crisis, where women were documented to enter the labor force temporarily. So on that, we're not sure which of these two effects will dominate and be observed in the final outcomes as how this COVID crisis is going to impact men and women's employment outcomes. So our paper tries to answer this question, what is the net employment effect on women and men's in Indonesia? And what we do is we use multiple rounds of the labor force surveys, or Sakernas, from 2016 to 2020, which has 2 rounds per year conducted in February and August of each year. And we leverage the fact that there are 2 rounds of data in each year to do what we call a seasonal difference in differences specification. So what we'll do here is we exploit the exogenous timing of the COVID-19 pandemic using season and year fixed effects. And this approach is similar to studies estimating mortality impacts of COVID using excess mortality instead of looking at deaths associated with contracting the virus. So in that case, in the case of looking at mortality impacts with excess mortality, what we would do is we would look at mortality due to all causes, due to limited access to health facilities, for example, mobility restrictions, and others, and not just confirmed deaths due to contracting coronavirus. Similarly, in our case, to estimate the excess employment effects, what we'll do is we're looking not only at job losses due to COVID layoffs, for example, but we're also looking at the effects on that. So all potential causes on employment, such as labor market tightening, and also difficulty in finding a job for new entrants. And this work is contributing to a fast-growing literature looking at the COVID impacts on employment by gender. And many of the studies are confirming the theoretical prediction that women are more adversely affected in both high and lower middle income countries. And many of the studies note that care on occupational segregation do in fact play a role. But on the other hand, there are few and some studies that find that women are either more affected or at least equally affected as men. In some countries like Canada, Holland, India, and a number of countries listed in the PowerPoint. One study in India who's trying to bridge between the 2 interpretations of the findings suggests that, in the case of India, the net employment itself is positive for women, but when they look at the effect conditional on women who were employed before the pandemic, they found that women were more likely to lose jobs because of the pandemic than men. Another strand of the literature also find that even if women are affected less or equal to that of men, men are recovering faster than women in the dynamics of the pandemic. So that brings us to the methods and what we're doing in this paper. So one of the strengths of this paper is the data that we used. Many of the studies mentioned earlier look at the early impacts of COVID relying on rapid surveys conducted after the fact. So conducted after the pandemic happened, without the baseline data before the COVID-19 pandemic. So what they would do to fill in the gap is to use recall surveys to get a comparable baseline data. Whereas in our case, because we're using the Sakernas cycle is well placed to capture the period before the pandemic happened and a few months in after the pandemic. Given the scale of the Sakernas data, we ended up with a total of 3.2 million observations of individuals between the age of 15 and 64. So that's the working age group. And it also means that we have national representative data at the individual level. In contrast, many of the rapid surveys were towards capturing representativeness at the household level, which would introduce some bias in assessing impacts. And with Sakernas maintaining its face-to-face data collection to some extent, means we also have comparable data quality and distribution to before. This graph illustrates our identification strategy, where the impacts of COVID is measured by the excess difference in employment rates between February and August relative to prior years. So for the case of men, so the graph on the left, we see a marked drop in the year of 2020, whereas for women, the year 2020 by red, we see a less steep slope in 2020 relative to previous years. So the assumption here is that in the absence of COVID, employment outcomes would follow a parallel trend. What we would, the excess difference would be identified as the impacts of COVID. So formally, this is our econometric specification. So Y is the employment outcome of individual I in province B in season S at year T. And then our coefficient of interest here is beta, with post being a dummy indicating a post-COVID-19 period or after March 2020, which in our case is only one period of August 2020. And we also include province, season, and year fixed effects. And we include a bunch of individual level control variables such as age, household size, marital status, education level, and urban residence. And we separately estimate this specification for male and female subjects. Okay, so what did we find? So we found that the pandemic has toughened the job search test, resulting in longer unemployment spells. And so what this graph shows is the likelihood of being unemployed for X months or greater. So the X-axis here indicates the number of months of individuals are being unemployed for. And what we see here is there's a mark up in the likelihood of being unemployed for at least a month. But then there's an increase, an ever-increasing increase in the likelihood of being unemployed for longer periods of months. So for 4 months or greater. We also find that women are entering the labor force while men are exiting the labor force. So the first 4 columns here are different categories of being part of the labor force. What we would be very much interested in is the likelihood of being employed. So this is the actual observation of men and women being employed, whereas the next 3 columns are different categories of being in the labor force. So people could be unemployed, so they would be in the labor force, but they're not necessarily employed, being discouraged and preparing for future business or a job. And what we see here is that there's a drop in men being employed and an increase in the likelihood of women being employed. Whereas for men, we see an increase in a commensurate increase in the likelihood of them being unemployed, discouraged, and preparing for future businesses, and also the likelihood of them being outside of the labor force. For women, we see the increase in the likelihood of being employed is commensurate to the decrease in the likelihood of being outside of the labor force. So we see this shift from women being outside of the labor force and entering the labor force and being employed. Unfortunately, the Sofyan data does not share household identifier information, so we cannot attribute the increase in women's employment among households that are more adversely impacted by COVID. So to gauge as to whether women are entering the labor force as added workers, we construct measures of recent entries into the labor market in either employment or unemployment. And we do find that women are more likely to be recently entering employment and less likely to recently enter unemployment. And both of these facts can support the hypothesis that women are likely entering the labor force as added workers, because women seem to be taking jobs wherever they can and being less concerned with finding the ideal job. So the fact that they're less likely to be unemployed means they're they're spending less time looking for the ideal job, right? So as a result, we find that there's an increase in employment participation among women and almost across all age groups. So here we look at employment rates in different age groups by men and women. For women, marked in green dots and lines, we see an increase, a positive coefficients for everyone in almost age groups, except for those in 19 to 29, whereas for men, it's consistently across all age groups to be negative. This increase in female employment is driven by the employment of lower educated females residing in rural areas, as we can see in the table here, where the positive coefficients are coming across for women with primary education or lower secondary education, when in fact, college-educated women are also experiencing a negative employment effect. Looking at across urban and rural areas, we also find that women experience an increase in their employment rates among women in rural areas. Whereas for men, it's consistently across to be negative. We also find that women are more likely to work as unpaid family workers. So even though women are entering employment, they're not necessarily entering salary work and salary work, but they're more likely to work as casual non-agricultural workers or unpaid family workers. For men, we also see a similar effect where men are also switching to informal activities, becoming casual workers and unpaid family workers. And we can also see that in when we look at employment quality in the form of formal and informal employment across the different types of sectors. What we see here is that for men and women, we see a positive increase in employment in the informal sector across the different types of sectors. So agriculture, industry, and services, as long as in the informal sector, we see an increase for both men and women. Whereas in the formal sector, it's consistently negative for men and negative for women, except in agriculture. In other dimensions of job quality, we also find that women and men work fewer hours and they earn less. So the first column here is looking at the likelihood of being underemployed. So this measures the individuals who would like to work more than they actually work for. And we see that there's an increase in the likelihood of both men and women being underemployed. So they express that they would like to work more hours than they actually could work for. We also see a decrease in the actual work hours, about 2.3 and 2.5 hours of work per week. And we also notice that men and women are also earning less. So in terms of monthly earnings, it's a decrease of about 14.7% for men and about 16.3% for women. But because of the rigidity of salary, while monthly earnings actually fall, hourly earnings actually go up because the change in monthly earnings cannot be as fast or as flexible as adjustments in work hours. So we also find interesting dynamics looking at specific population groups of interest like the youths. Here we divide youths into two different categories: high school age youths between the age of 15 and 18. And after this slide, we also look at youths between the age of 19 and 24. And to look at the dynamics among youths, we divide them into four categories of this nexus of school and work. So they can either work or go to school, or one or the other. So we create these four categories. And what we see here is high school age youths are turning away from focused schooling. And so this is column 2, where they only go to school and do not work. And instead of being in focused schooling, a lot of the high school age youths are combining school and work. So there's an increase in the likelihood of those youths going to school and also employed at the same time, and an increase in the likelihood of dropping out from school as well. And what's worrisome when we look at column 1 is we also look at the likelihood of being employed for more than 20 hours a week. And what we notice is that there's an increase in the likelihood of working substantively for more than 20 hours a week. So that means when there's a fraction of youths who are combining school and work, who are also working quite substantively, that it could potentially distract them from their schooling obligations. Looking at the older youths, we also find that these older youths are also combining school and work. But we also find, interestingly, that older youths are also having trouble finding jobs, and they're more likely to shift into the need category. So this category of being not in school and being employed, we see a drop in the likelihood of being in this category, and an increase in the likelihood of being not in school and not employed. And in contrast to the previous finding for the high school age youths, we are also concerned that there's a likelihood of, a decrease in the likelihood of being employed substantively for more than 20 hours a week. So to conclude this presentation, we note that the initial onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has made it harder for unemployed people to find jobs. However, it has narrowed down the gender gap in employment participation in Indonesia due to female added workers. And the increase in female employment is pretty substantial. In the past 20 years or so, labor force participation rates of women have only increased by 3.6 percentage points. 3.9 percentage points. And so the 1.3 percentage points increase in the likelihood of being employed for women actually represents about a third increase in the likelihood of being employed. A third of the progress in the past 20 years or so, right? But unfortunately, the female workers that we observe in the data are mostly lower educated women working in, residing in rural areas, whereas the college educated women are negatively affected by the pandemic. We also note that the COVID-19 pandemic lowers employment quality as both men and women are turning away from formal employment into informal employment as unpaid family workers during the pandemic. Women and men are also working fewer hours and generating lower earnings. And I see my time is up, and so I'll stop here and thank you everyone for the attention, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts, questions, and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. Now we'll be taking questions from the floor. Good, if you can raise your hands and then we'll let you ask your question directly.
Maaf, Pak Umbud, there is one in the Q&A box.
Okay.
Shall I answer the question in the Q&A box?
Oh yeah, Pak Taufik, yeah, from Pak Taufik. Yeah, Pak Taufik, do you want to ask your question directly? Pak Taufik? Okay, so the question is, in your opinion, will this new trend of women employment continue after the economic recovers? Is this a good trend for gender equality despite the lower job quality? Pak Daniel, please.
Thank you, Pak Umbu, and thank you, Pak Taufik, for this question as well. So this is a great question, and this is actually one question that we're trying to answer in a separate paper, in a follow-up paper, given the new rounds of Sapernas data. We could actually look at employment dynamics over time and how the COVID-19 pandemic is, whether the trend will continue over time, and whether the increase in female employment is going to be sustained over time. Historically, the added workers don't necessarily translate to sustained employment, especially if they go into informal employment, because like from what we saw earlier, the increase in female employment is concentrated among the lower educated in rural areas and informal work and agriculture, right? So this is not the kind of jobs that would be that would necessarily have long-term sustainability. So potentially after the COVID-19 pandemic, the households are coping well after the pandemic, then it is possible that women are dropping again off from the labor force again. It is so at this point it is conjecture, and it's something that we are looking for in a separate paper. But another point that I want to make is there's a momentum. There's a momentum that where policy could potentially play a role. Because in the case of, for example, the World War II in the U.S., in the World War II case in the U.S., where a lot of men were not available to work, and so women were counted on to participate in the labor force. Studies have found and documented that that momentum eventually translated to a higher rate of female employment rate that could be sustained in the long run. And one of the reasons for that sustainable development was the inclusion of or the facilitation of women into the employment. So back in the 1940s, the US implemented the first and probably the only one federally provided universal childcare in the US, which facilitated the transition of women into employment. But then the kind of employment that was that women got absorbed into in the US was different. They were in the manufacturing, they had a salaried job. So eventually women could stay in the long run. But so now we're at a crossroad because there's this momentum of women participating in employment. So there's a potential for a change in social norms and acceptability of women working. But if we can facilitate women to transition to better types of employment, that could be potentially more sustainable in the long run. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. I can take one more question from the floor. Anyone? Okay. I think. Oh yeah, this is a question from Asi Halomuan. Does this mean that some jobs are more resilient during pandemic, and women are more competitive for these jobs? Please, Pak Daniel.
Thank you, Pak. So yes, it seems like some jobs were more resilient during the pandemic. So that's clear. But one thing that was interesting from this pandemic and the experience of this pandemic is the jobs that were resilient before the pandemic in a typical crisis was not necessarily the type of jobs that would be resilient during this pandemic. So I think that points out to the, in preparing for a future pandemic or a future crisis, it's hard or challenging to predict which jobs would be resilient in a crisis. And the second question about whether women are more competitive for these jobs. So in what we saw in our study is that women are entering into agriculture that are, somewhat quote unquote resilient. But the fact that they could be absorbed into that could also signal the fact that they're less picky about the type of jobs they would like to get into. And potentially this is because of the nature of their employment is to help households cope with income losses. And so they wouldn't have that, privilege of being picky at this time. But whether, the kind of jobs that would be more resilient in the future, let's say the salaried work or, the tech jobs, whether those jobs are more competitive and women are going to have to compete more for those kind of jobs is a question that we are not answering with our paper.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. It's very interesting paper. I think we can take one more question from my former colleague in Semeru, Ibu Atia. Do you want to ask your question directly, Ibu Atia?
Hi, Raya. Hi, Mas Daniel. Salam
Hi.
kenal. I just have one question for Mas Daniel. It's a really interesting study, but from your conclusion, do you have any some policy implications in particular in terms of female participation in the labor market in Indonesia that is quite stagnant in the last few years? It seems that the gender gap is narrowing, but how about the quality of job that provided in the pandemic time? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahathir.
Thank you, Batia. Please, Pak Daniel.
This is a really great question. And yes, so I think so I'll break up this question into several pieces. The first part is like the gender gap is narrowing. So it seems like, and that's what we initially, when we were writing the paper, we somewhat the findings as if it's a positive message that the gender, which is great, but then so the problem with looking at only employment rate as at the extensive margin, so whether women work or not work, or labor force participation of whether women work or not work, right? It has limitations. It's a useful proxy for whether a proxy for development and the progress for women's economic empowerment, but then it has limitations in terms of measuring the quality of their employment. And this study highlights that fact, that it is not only important to look at the extensive margin of employment, but also at the intensive margin of the quality of their employment. And from what what our study would highlight is the fact that the quality of employment would be the one that makes jobs more sustainable. Say if women are more likely to be in better quality jobs, then the kind of this momentum is going to likely be more sustainable. Whereas if women stays in informal employment with no certainty about whether they can still work in 3-4 months from now, then it's not certain whether this momentum can be sustained in the long run. But with regards to the policy implications, we do note that there's a positive or somewhat positive silver lining out of this pandemic, that there's a narrowing of the gender gap. And there's what I mentioned earlier about the potential for momentum and the change in social norms or acceptability of women working. But one thing that we need to change is, so one that might be acceptable now is that it's okay for women to work at times of crisis, right? So that's one part of the social norms. But it's a different norms that women can work in normal times without the crisis. So how can we make the transition? And that's an interesting policy debate that we can discuss. But there are a couple of different things that we have also noted, is that one, we want to facilitate the transition and make sure that there sufficient infrastructure to help the transition, for example, with childcare, but also with providing better job matching process, facilitating that transition to better employment outcomes, and also to change that social norms directly or indirectly, let's say with behavioral nudges, so it would be more acceptable for women to work in workplaces. Okay, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Pak Daniel. Thank you, Pak Daniel. Yeah. So it's interesting. So I think we'll need more research on that as well. And I mean, to fill the story. So thank you, Pak Daniel. And the next presenter is Pak Ian Sapulete from ERIA. And I think he teamed up with his colleagues from Parahyangan University and Pajajaran University. Pak Ian, you have 20 minutes for presentation, and then we followed by Q&A for 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay. Is my voice clear enough?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Pak Umbu. Greetings, everyone. My name is Ian from the Economics Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. And I'm going to present a paper that I presented before at the IRSA conference. This paper was written by me, myself, and also my co-writers from Universitas Pajajaran, Prof. Lury Effendi, Bu Vera Intani Dewi from Universitas Parahyangan, Bu Fitri Asuswi also from Universitas Pajajaran, Bu Ervani, and Pak Anhar Fauzan Priyono. The title of the paper is The Interregional Assessment of MSME Career Channeling, Analyzing the Role of Digital Environment in Pre and During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I think compared to the last two presentations, this paper is fairly short and straightforward. There are 5 sections to this presentation. I'm going to explain the background and objectives of this paper in the first section. At the second section of this presentation, I'm going to outline the current development of loan channeling to MSMEs and also about digital competitiveness and 6 regions in Indonesia. On the outline of my empirical strategy is in the third section. Finally, we will have some estimation results and also analysis of the estimation results in the fourth section. I will also explain about the current state of digital competitiveness, especially explaining the components of digital competitiveness and compare it by regions. And finally, in the last section, there will be some concluding remarks and implications for policymakers. Okay, so the first one about the background. So the COVID-19 pandemic can be seen as both a challenge and also an opportunity. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need for digital technology adaptation because it has accelerated very much during the pandemic, especially in terms of e-commerce adoption and also about financial technology. Well, it can be seen as both an opportunity and also a challenge because it really depends on who you are. For those who are already tech savvy, they that have sufficient knowledge of digital technology, the pandemic and the digital acceleration that comes with it is really an opportunity because people are changing their behavior. That those people that are used to conduct their businesses offline, now they move to primarily conducting their businesses, doing their transactions online. And this really benefits those that are tech savvy, those that are digitally literate, the kind of MSMEs that have been operating online for quite some time. But on the other spectrum, there are also those who do not possess the skill and capability needed to compete in the digital era. So the gap between these two is the digital divide. Has been said as a kind of scarring effect from the COVID-19 pandemic because this effect is likely to last for a very long time because the behavior of the people in the economy has changed. Okay, so this is a scarring effect that can be seen as both opportunity and challenge depending on who you are. And regarding MSMEs, especially in Indonesia, MSMEs contribute to a significant share of employment and also output in Indonesia. So this issue is really important because we want to see the comparison between these two groups, MSME who operate in digital savvy region, in digital savvy area, and those that are not. And regarding the financing aspect of this paper, affordable financing has been shown as one of the prerequisites for MSMEs growth. Those that can secure affordable and prudent financing have been shown to grow better than those that are not. Okay, so and also during the COVID-19 pandemic, there are some signs of unequal credit channeling. We have seen that businesses that may not possess the digital capability, they receive lower level of loan from banks because banks they seek for profit. Okay, so when they want to give out loans, they see whether this business will give the returns they need in the future. And this is exactly what this paper is trying to prove. Okay, this paper aimed to analyze the credit channeling to MSME before and during the pandemic, emphasizing on the effect of digital technology competitiveness in regions where MSMEs operate. So we basically want to test whether MSMEs that are operating in regions that are digitally competitive as have more likelihood to receive financing from banks. Okay, so when answering this objective, I think it's really important because it will affect the future really, especially for Indonesia, because MSMEs can be seen as the future seeds of growth. And when they cannot secure the affordable financing they need to grow, it will really impact the future of this country because MSME still holds a significant portion of the economy. This is the graph showing the average loan channeling for 6 regions in Indonesia. Bali and Nusa Tenggara is Indonesia, Java, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Sumatra. The data is presented in per capita using 2018 prices. And as you probably have guessed, the largest one is the Java region, while the lowest one, regions that receive the lowest MSME per capita loan is the East Indonesian region. And as we can see from this graph, the red line is the pandemic, the start of the pandemic. We have not really returned to our pre-pandemic level. If we can draw a trend line here, the trend line is supposed to go beyond here, but we have not returned to our pre-pandemic level. This is really a concern because, as I've said before, MSME, small businesses, is one of key pillar in our economy. And if we cannot give the affordable financing needed, it can probably hit us worse in the future. And as you have probably know that MSME is also one key concern for the Indonesian economic recovery strategy from the COVID-19 pandemic. As we have seen from this graph, we have not returned to our pre-pandemic level, and regions that are less developed, such as this Indonesian region, receive lower level of financing even before the pandemic, really. But during the pandemic, you can also see that they experience a higher decrease compared to other regions. So the graph that I've shown you before is fairly similar to this one in terms that the composition of regions in this graph is similar, and also the ranks is also similar. This is a graph showing the level of digital technology competitiveness index rank average for 6 regions. Regions with the highest rank is the Java region, and the 4 regions here, they tend to cluster together. But one interesting finding here, not really, because we kind of expect this. The East Indonesia region is really low level of digital competitiveness compared to other regions, especially compared to Java. Java is just beyond East Indonesia in this aspect list. But the other 4 regions, they tend to cluster together. So we have 3 things here. The Java region ranks highest, and it has a really starking disparity compared to other regions, while on the other end of the spectrum, we have East Indonesia that tends to rank low. Okay, so we will develop a model here, and our basis for the model and this research is the credit rationing theory, especially on the third type of credit rationing theory, the redlining type. A lender will decline to extend a credit to a borrower based on the risk level and not make their needed return at any interest rate. The keyword here is the needed return. Okay, so our hypothesis here is that the digital competitiveness affect the expected return that banks perceive of MSME. Okay, so our hypothesis is MSMEs that operate in regions with higher level of digital competitiveness is perceived by bank to as one that will be able to give higher return in the future, and thus the digital competitiveness will serve as a key variable when banks ration their credit. So the regions that operate in areas with higher level of digital competitiveness will receive higher loans from banks. Okay, so this is the hypothesis that I just mentioned to you before, the focus of our study. And for our econometrics modeling, we developed a model by modifying previous model developed by Nugroho et al. From 2015. The variables included in our model are some basic macroeconomics variables. We have here our key variable, the growth of MSME loan in per capita and 2018 prices. All variables are in 2018 prices. And also we have GDP per capita, gross fixed capital formation per capita, government spending per capita, also inflation, unemployment rate, human development index, and our main variable, key variable, the digital competitiveness index, right? Okay. And as you may have noticed, not all these variables are available monthly, but some variables are available only quarterly, and some even are available yearly, such as HDI. But we really feel the need to include this variable in our model, especially HDI, is so that we can control for other development factors other than digital competitiveness. Okay, so HDI really needs to be in this model because we need to control for other development factors. We don't want our key variables here to be contaminated by other development factors. That's why HDI really needs to be here, and also variables that are not in monthly frequency, their value is constant throughout the month. Okay, so we will conduct 4 estimation really. This is our model. We will conduct 3 estimation. So there is a model for 2019 from January to December, for 2020 from January to December, and for 2021 from January to December. Wow. So why do we do that? Okay, so as you can see from our econometric specification here, we have DCI rank and the coefficient is beta 2. The coefficient is beta 2 here, and this is really key because we would like to compare the value of beta 2 in 2019, in 2020, and 2021. Okay, so if the value of beta 2 is larger and more significant in 2020 compared to 2019, or in 2021 compared to 2020, then that means that the credit rationing, that digital competitiveness is becoming more important because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So after the start of the pandemic, if the beta 2 is larger and more significant, that means that it is becoming a more important factor that we really need to pay attention to. Okay, so we run the estimation for 2019 from January to December, 2020 from January to December, and 2021 from January to December, so that we can compare the value of beta 2 in these 3 time frames. And also we use one-step system GMM for this. And also for robustness, we use some different model specifications. We exclude and include some of the macroeconomic variables, this one, so that we can really find provide a robust findings. And also we also use other than GMM, we also use pooled OLS and also random effect model. So in total, we have about 30-ish something estimation. And this is our main estimation. And as you can see from the table, almost the same for every model. So the findings is robust. And I can also show you that the estimation using OLS and random pooled model estimation and also random effect model is also similar. They all show that our key variable here, the DCI variable, if you compare the value from 2020 to 2019, in 2021, it's positive and significant. In 2020, it's not significant. And in 2019, it's smaller than the value of the coefficient in 2020. So our hypothesis here is proven that the digital competitiveness is becoming more important from the start of the pandemic. So after the start of the pandemic, digital competitiveness here is really a key thing that we need to pay attention to. And it's really, the findings is really robust. When we exclude some variables, the value is still similar for 2021, 2020, and 2019. We have various model specifications here, and also we have 2 other tables that show the findings using 2 other estimation methods. Okay, yeah, so our hypothesis here is proven. And we will also like to point out that because MSME can be seen as the future seeds of growth here, and as we have seen before about the loan channeling by region and also the level of digital competitiveness, regions outside of Java have low level of digital competitiveness, and they already receive a lower amount of loans to MSMEs from bank. And because the digital competitiveness is becoming more important, these findings have some important implication for the future of inequality in Indonesia. If no intervention is given, it is likely that regions outside of Java, especially ones in East Indonesia, will likely face hardship in the future in securing MSMEs loan they need, and thus it will hamper the future growth in this region and worsen the already existing inequality problem in Indonesia. Okay, now I would like you to take a look at each component of the Digital Competitiveness Index, because I would really like to show the key areas of concern regarding digital competitiveness by comparing the value of each component of this variable in the six regions. Okay, so Digital Competitiveness Index has three components. We have the input components, the components, and also the support components. Okay, so the first one is really about the input components, and here we have three subcomponents. We have human resource, ICT usage, and ICT expenditure. The starkest disparity here we can see is from the human resource subcomponent, where the Java region really ranks the highest, while the other regions is significantly lower than Java. Okay, and the lowest region here is the East Indonesia region. The score is 20, while Java is above 50, so more than doubles. Okay, so and this subcomponent is mainly about the literacy and digital skill possessed by people living in that region. So what we can infer from this graph is that people living outside of Java, especially in East Indonesia, is more digitally illiterate compared to those living in Java and do not possess the digital skill to conduct their business in a digital environment. And also the other one that has some striking disparity between Java and outside of Java region is the ICT usage. And also we can relate this to how low the level of digital literacy is. So probably we have not proven this, but probably due to low level of digital literacy, the ICT usage is also low, but there also can be other factors. Okay, so the first here is a key thing that we really need to focus on, and the second one is the output variable. For the output component, we look about the share of digital related sectors in the economy, and also about entrepreneurship and productivity, and also about manpower. Here in entrepreneurship and productivity, this subcomponent tells a story about how workers or entrepreneurs in each region possess the digital skill and digital capability needed to operate their business in a digital environment. While the manpower subcomponent here, these two are really interrelated, shows the percentage of or the ratio of workers operating in digital related sector. So for the manpower subcomponent, it's fairly equally distributed among the six regions. Regions outside of Java is similar to Java in that they have a significant portion that have transition into a digital related sector. But one key thing here is that even though they have transition to digital related sector, they do not possess digital skill needed to operate business in that sector, because the average score for this subcomponent, entrepreneurship and productivity, is fairly low and unequal between outside of Java and Java. That means that even though people have transitioned into the digital related sector, they still do not possess the necessary skill to operate business in that sector, and thus it is not optimal. At this point of time, it's not optimal. So there is a need to improve here by improving the digital entrepreneurship of people, especially those living outside of Java. And the last one is the support subcomponent. We have infrastructure, finance and also regulation. One key thing to remember here is about our infrastructure. There is still significant disparity, especially between East Indonesia and also Kalimantan, with the Java region that has possessed significantly better level of ICT infrastructure. That's one. And the other one is about finance. This one is more about the use of financial technology, e-payment, and also accessing peer-to-peer fintech lending. It's fairly low in East Indonesia, well, in regions outside of Java, really. And that shows that our current effort in developing financial technology is still very much concentrated in the Java region. Okay, so for my concluding remarks, I would like to point out that digital divide is really a challenge that we need to face. And regarding MSMEs that have always posed a significant share in our economy, it can be either an opportunity or a threat, depending who you are really. If you are not operating, or if you are not digitally competitive, or you are not operating in regions that are digitally competitive, you are more likely to face hardship in securing loan you need to grow in the future. And thus, this problem can really worsen the inequality problem in Indonesia. And also about digital competitiveness, there are really two main things that we need to improve on. The first one is the level of digital literacy, especially regarding entrepreneurship, digital literacy. And the second one is about investment in ICT-related sector. Okay, that's all from me. I thank my institution, ERIA, for supporting this research, and also Universitas Piarah. That's all from me. This is still a work in progress, so your comments are highly encouraged. And also, I would like to point out that I am an East Indonesian myself, so there's a potential for personal bias, even though I always avoid it. That's all from me.
Thank you, Pyan. So now I will take questions from the floor. You can raise your hands if you want to ask question. Ibu Lydia, do you want to ask question?
Yes, I actually have a question. I wanted to give a chance for others first. I'm not really at all familiar with this area, but when creditors channel credit, what are the indicators of, do they actually have in the checklist, for example, or in their due diligence, how deep or how in detail do they look at the digital capacity of the people requesting for credit? So that's my question.
Okay, but thank you very much for your question. That's really beyond the scope of this paper, and I'm not a banker myself, so I cannot say for sure. But the theory says that what banks really see is the expected return. That means applying for credit from the bank. So I think that can touch various areas. But the point is, if banks see you and that can give high expected return, they will likely give it to you. And if not, then they will not likely to give loans to you. And as proven by this paper, one key thing that banks see when they want to give loans to MSMEs is the level of digital competitiveness in regions that the MSMEs operate.
That's interesting. Anyone from the floor?
If I
But
can, sorry,
yes.
Go ahead. If I can follow up, yeah, it's I guess I still have to think about this, but in Eastern Indonesia, if a business is, well, perhaps they're not digitized because the demand is not there for being for selling online and for conducting payments online and so on. Because as I see your paper, it looks like there is a high correlation between, of course, access in and so on. Being, for example, 100% digitized or very internet savvy and so on, I wonder if that business will be very competitive in Eastern Indonesia, given the fact that their consumers may not be digitized themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the follow-up, Bu. So the concern of this paper is not really just about the supply side of the MSMEs, but also the environment in general. That's why the title of this paper is about the environment, the digital environment. So we look both at the MSMEs, let's say the sellers, and also the consumers in the economy. And if what you are saying is true, then yeah, that is also a concern that this paper tried to raise, is that people in East Indonesia, for example, are not digitally competitive, both the consumer and also the producer side. As we have seen from the graph that I showed and in some of the last slides, there's a low level of digital literacy really. The first one shows the level of low digital literacy that are not specifically about the sellers or the or about MSMEs, but in general, the level of digital literacy there is low. And as we have seen, digitalization can really boost the economic growth. And if we just let this be because, for example, regions in East Indonesia don't have the consumer base for this, I don't think that's a good approach. I think what we need to do is really push so that both the consumers and the supply side in East Indonesia are digitally literate and can participate in this transition towards a digital era.
Cool. Now I will take these 3 questions from the Q&A box. From the first question is from Julfian Safrian. Jul, do you wanna ask your question directly? Silakan, and then from Ibu Citra Bukhori.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. I put 3 questions on the Q&A box, especially about the details of your data. I don't know whether you have these details or not on your data, but it will be great if you have it and you could do the further analysis, because I think it would be more powerful if you could. The first one is, do you separate between the private or commercial loans and then the subsidized loan, or KUR, KUR, on your data? Perhaps there is some different behavior between the two debtors. That's the first one. The second one is, do you also differentiate between the MSMEs based on their size and also based on the sectors? So it's in the micro, small, or medium, and then the sector is especially trade and non-trade. So yeah, please. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sofyan. And about the data is a province level data for 34 Indonesian provinces from 2019 to 2021. So no, we do not distinguish between the private and KUR loan in our data. We just use the total bank loan to those 34 provinces. And also, I think it's good what you mentioned about the different types of MSME, the micro, small, and medium, and also different sectors. And I think it's good for future studies. And our current studies, we have too many models already. And if you want to add, for example, if you want to add the separation between micro, small, and medium, we will have 3 times more than this one, and we already have 30-ish. So it can be used in future studies, but for this one, we do not do this yet. But it's a really good suggestion. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Pyan. Thank you, Pak Jul. Yeah. And now to Ibu Citra Bukhari. Ibu Citra, please. Ibu Citra.
Can I just answer?
Oh yeah. So okay. I'll just read a question for you. Aside from the digital divide across region, are you also looking at the digital divide between male-female entrepreneurs? What's the finding? If yes, what is the finding?
So as I've said to Pak Sofyan before, we use province level data, so no, unfortunately we can distinguish between male and female entrepreneurs, although it can be used for future studies really to distinguish between male and female entrepreneurs. And because MSMEs also have significant portion of women in there, and it has long been used as a medium to include for inclusion in Indonesia, especially for female entrepreneurs. So I think it's a good idea for future research, but unfortunately we have not investigated that area yet in this paper.
I see. So, Pyan, does it mean that your findings is the aggregate explanation of this situation, but then you will need, if you want to prioritize on certain type of MSEs, then you will need to dig more into MS individual information. Is it?
The MSME data is the aggregate MSME data in the province. It's not distinguished for each type of MSME. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Pyan and team. One more question from the floor, if you wanna ask question. Okay. So now I will give the floor to Ibu Lydia for announcement and probably administration or something like that. Yeah, please, Ibu Lydia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks again to all the speakers today, especially those joining from the US. It's already midnight. Nothing more for me except before I close the room, I will put up the next FKP, which will be on the 18th, on whether PKH, cash transfer, has any impact on child marriage. So thank you, Pak Umbu Rekuraya, for chairing the event from Sumba, and great to have everyone present. Hopefully this will be an inspiration for all the other researchers to conduct impactful research in the future. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Ibu Lydia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bu Lydia, Umbu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Pak Dimas.
Thank you, Pak. Thank you, Bu.
Thank you, Ian.
Recording stopped.